Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Inside Battlefield. My name is Tom, Community Manager for Battlefield, and today we're back with an episode to talk about the current state of vehicles. So with me are Eddie and Ross. Welcome guys, how's it going?
Really good. It's freezing cold. It's -3 in Stockholm, so that's fun.
Very fun. What about you, Eddie?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Is it also cold where you are at?
No, well, it's just not warm, let's say. So.
Okay, good. So, Eddie, it's your first time on the podcast. Ross has joined us before, but can we give a quick intro about who you are and what you do at DICE? So, Eddie, let's start with you.
Sure. My name is Eddie. I work as a vehicle designer at DICE on BF 2042. I started working as vehicle designer, I think it was sometime around season 1. So I naturally moved on to work on EBL CRAM, which happens to be one of my favorite vehicles in the game, obviously, since the first one.
Awesome.
And I think I've done a little bit of work on Tor, but it was already getting wrapped up by the rest of the team. So I moved on and done some work on the abilities and the weapons on the brawlers, which was great fun.
Awesome. Thank you. What about you, Ross?
I'm just a muggle, so I can't compete with the wizards. So I'm the design director on 2042. So what do? So my job is to help everybody facilitate and get us moving in the direction that the live service needs to go in. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. So welcome both. And for all the listeners, just a quick heads up. Usually we do these recordings locally, but today both Eddie and Ross are joining me remotely. So it might happen that there's a little bit of lag or a little bit of a connection drop here or there. If that happens, then you know why. So let's jump into the vehicle discussions. Let's start with an easy question. How are you both feeling about the current state of vehicles during Season 6? And specifically knowing where, we've added a bunch of vehicles over the seasons. We've changed their balance many, many times, which we'll go into a little bit later. So, Eddie, let's start with you. What's your current thoughts on the state of vehicles?
It's an easy question. Look, how do you feel about vehicles state? Is the short answer to that is that I'm kind of okay and happy with where we are, but you can't bring in a vehicle designer and they would go like, yeah, it's great. Next question. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a elaborate on why I'm going to say what I'm going to say. So, there's no denying, look, BF 2042 was launched the way it did, and it was a rough time when it comes to infantry versus vehicle versus vehicles, combat and balance both, right? And two main challenges that we faced while we were trying to stabilize basically the state of the game was, one of them mostly was the vehicle deployment, right? The way that we handle it on 2042, we give a lot of freedom to players. And it's not necessarily only about deploy screen or vehicles. The entire game is about players' freedom and decision, right? This is something that we never had on previous game. Like I can give you an example, like Zavod on Battlefield 4, right? If I remember correctly, you had an air vehicle, you had a transport air vehicle, you had a little bit, a tank, an IFV, and an AA, right? When you look at this, it's just a map and a bunch of vehicles thrown at it. But if you think about it, you have the AA to take care of your helicopters, you have the IFV to take care of the infantry, and you have the tank to always keep that IFV in check. So it's an ecosystem that they all feed off each other. It's healthy. And, it's always kind of controlled, if that makes sense, right? It's still up to players how they play, but it's a controlled environment. While on BF 2042, we take all that control from our hand and we give it to players' hands. And that obviously causes some balance issues that we've faced since we launched the game. And we quickly realized that, like the bolts, for example, on the light transport category, if you remember, people could just spam it with 30 millimeter and stuff like that.
You mean during launch?
During launch, yeah. So there was a lot of tweaking, a lot of thinking, a lot of changes we had to do, integrating this into our design philosophy and balance philosophy. Because when you have one vehicle, right, that is very good at one thing only, you have one of it, it's not a big deal. But when people start to spawn many of that, then you're going to have a problem. When you have a wide map, obviously people are going to choose the vehicle that is good for long ranges.
Yep.
You can't blame them. If they can spawn 1, 2, God forbid, 3 or 4 of them, you have a balance issues. So we had to quickly try to fix this problem. This is one of them. And obviously the other one was that we had to make sure that these vehicles work on both all our warfare modes, 64 players and 128. I will tell you, it's not a straightforward business to find a sweet spot for everything in the game. Replenish, reload, active time, duration, cooldown, that works on both of these modes, right? But we had to come up with that.
Okay.
And the goal here is not to just make it barely function, it's to make it function and be good on both of these. So this was also a big challenge that we had to deal with. So all these things considered, which were new to the franchise, I think we are at a stable state, so to say, with all these things that I said considered.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I guess so. To summarize, if I understand it correctly, there's a lot of balance that obviously needs to be done for vehicles, but we have some limitations through the deploy screen about how many vehicles and which vehicles we can deploy. We have, a lot of player freedom, so they can choose what they want to play with, but we also have many maps and modes with different player counts, like 64 versus 128. So to find the correct balance between all of those, that's been a challenge.
It's pretty tricky. Yeah, it's been pretty tricky, and it was a new challenge as well. So I mean, I'm not here to complain about it. You got to play the cards you dealt. That's why we're here. That's why we've been trying to fix things. But these are basically the lead up, the build up to the answer that I was going to tell you, that I feel like we have reached the point that we have stabilized the balance to a point. Like we have an ecosystem, the vehicles can live off each other. All the vehicles have a role that they can be successful if deployed correctly. And I don't think there is perfection when you have this many moving parts in general. Like it's never been perfect. No game's ever been perfect, especially with all these moving parts and the fact that so many of it is in players' hands and decision, right? But I think the goal here is to get to a point that is as good as it can be, and we are a lot closer to that point that we have ever been over the past 2 years.
Okay, that's so. To summarize, you are happy. Like there's room for improvement. But you're happy with the current state of vehicle gameplay and balance.
Kind of, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like as a game designer, the work is never done. There's always more tweaks we can make, which we will. But so far, at least you're, fairly happy, which is good to hear. So over to you, Ross. What are your current thoughts about the state of vehicles in Season 6?
Yeah, I'd say that pretty similar. So I think we made steps so I think 2042 is a complex game. There's a lot going on. So the first thing that we looked at was the complexity across, like within a vehicle. So that was the first step with the loadout changes. I think pretty much across the vehicles now, there's a more understandable role for each vehicle. It's clearer what they're good and bad at. And there's some balance still to do. I think like within certain vehicles, I think things like the little bird, the community can kind of see that we're still kind of poking at that. But then more broadly, it's like, for me, it's the balance. It's the eternal kind of struggle, right? It's vehicles versus soldier. And I think that for me is the thing that we still need to work on. But I think in general, we're in a pretty good place. And I think just some of the stuff that we've done individually on like vehicle systems, in terms of like cameras, controls, that kind of thing, has overall made the vehicle experience pretty okay. So I'd say the thing that I want to look at next is getting that balance between vehicles and soldiers. And as Eddie said, there's some complications to that when it comes to player counts and stuff, and across modes. But yeah.
Great. Thank you for the summary. And a follow-up question from myself then, just, how is it to have to try and balance between different player counts, 128, 64, player freedom, they can play with what they want. We do have the class system now, but the weapon choices are still open. For example, how has it been overall to try and find the right balance for you as a
Painful.
team? It's difficult. Like, I guess
Fun.
what I'm trying to help like our listeners understand is like it's very difficult to find the right balance with so many new vehicles as well that we added, new specialists, new weapons. Every time we add something, it changes the complete balance of the game, and we have to revisit some areas that we were maybe previously happy with.
It's generally easier to go down than it is up, right?
Yep.
So if you have a 64-player game and then you move down on the numbers, you can then tweak your vehicle numbers to kind of account for that. And that's, I think, what we've seen with previous titles. When you go up, everything kind of like exponentially grows, and so suddenly you've got rockets on top of rockets, and that I think has taken us a while to kind of balance out. It's tricky.
So let's do a recap of some of the changes we've made, because if you look at in season 1 we brought in the stealth helicopters, which was a very cool moment, but we've brought in many more vehicles since then and many changes. So Eddie and Ross, can we start with a recap of, I guess, the bigger things we've done going all the way back up until now? Let's start with you, Eddie.
I mean, we've done a lot of changes, right? A lot of sweeping changes on vehicles. I think I still remember, I don't know if you do, Tom, but it came to you and Kevin asking about that Discord about jets. You remember that?
I remember.
I think that
I remember.
it ended up getting like 1,200 comments on that. It was painful to go through. But I think at the beginning of this year, we set the goal to make sure vehicles gameplay actually get to a point that they deserve to be, to get the big improvements. And we have gone ahead and done a lot of changes. So it was the big one would be the loadout change on all the ground vehicles that we have done.
During season 5.
During season 5, yeah. And then we have changed the entire handling of the ground vehicles, like the tanks, with the steering, with the acceleration, because it was just not keeping up with the pace of the game. With the infantry, right? They needed help. We also done a bunch of changes to jets and helicopters. I'm hoping people are enjoying that a little bit more than they used to, especially with the helicopters. The changes there was a little bit more drastic compared to jets.
Can you give some examples of specifics we did and why it's?
I mean, the handling of the jets, both jets and helicopters were changed, right? Especially with the jet, we changed the cameras and everything, so it feels a little bit tighter, right? And for the helicopters, we changed both the gun performance on the gunner and the way that the helicopter handles. There's just more momentum, and feels like it feels a little bit more like the glory days of Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, when two pilots one gunner and a pilot could just team up. And if they played their cards correctly, they could actually be devastating. Yep. And it feels like we got that back, and it feels good. But yeah, that's I think all these changes has been sweeping changes on vehicles over the past year. I'm pretty proud of this.
Yeah, I think so. The team has done a lot. Is there anything you have to add, Ross?
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered it. You forgot vehicle counts on levels. I think that was a pretty big change.
Oh yeah, sure.
I think that helped us get a bit more clarity. It made some of the levels feel a bit more unique from one another. Yep. I think there's still some stuff we can do on that, to be honest. But but the big one for me, my favorite change, to be honest, was the handling stuff, particularly on helicopters. And a lot of that wasn't really necessarily about just handling, was it? It was camera work, and there was a lot of like really subtle changes that we put in there just to make things feel more responsive, more reactive, more controllable. So yeah, those are the big ones. And then just overall getting more more of a sense of role within each vehicle is probably a big step.
Yeah, and for the vehicle loadout changes, I think during or before season 5, I think we had both a podcast and a blog about that as well. But when we just say, oh, we did the vehicle loadout changes, like the amount of work that went into that was a lot. As I understood, we holistically looked at all vehicles, which weapons do they have, their full loadout, and what should it be in the future based on, what role do we want them to have? Are they too strong in certain areas? So for every vehicle, we completely overhauled which weapons they had access to or loadout they had access to. That was a massive change. I think that is actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but probably the biggest changes we made to vehicles during the entirety of Battlefield 2042.
Pretty much, yeah. It was fun though. It was a fun. I think it was a fun change, like to go through and kind of reassess everything. I think once you're actually playing everything live, it makes that easier.
Yeah.
So there were some long meetings, but yeah, it was good. I think the fear was always like, do you change too much? Are you becoming too restrictive? But I think we just about got there.
So how do you feel about that one as a team, knowing that's one of the bigger changes we made? Like I think Eddie and Ross, you both mentioned you feel quite positive about the current gameplay. What about the loadouts itself? Can we expect further changes there, or do we feel no, every vehicle is now in its intended combat role?
Should I go, Ross, or you want to go?
You go for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, back when we decided to do that, the explosive spam was a hot topic, and so many explosive weapons were actually equipped on these vehicles. And given they are light transport, so you could always spawn them in, like constantly. So it was just a no-brainer. It wasn't healthy for the gameplay. And when we started looking at it, we're like, okay, going to lower the explosive spam, but at the same time, we want to give something to players who can actually have fun with them, right? So that's how we added like the shotgun or some other weapons to these vehicles. But overall, I think we've reduced the explosive spam, at least the ones that are fueled by vehicles, which is a much better spot. You no longer have that HTT Storm sitting on top of the cliff with a 50mm cannon, shooting at everything. It's a lot healthy-ish. And it was, as Ross said, it was pretty fun to go through everything. I know there are still some cases of certain weapons on certain vehicles causing issues, so never say never. We'll see how it's going to go based on feedback, based on our own evaluation. So it's not necessarily the end, but as it stands, I think we're in a much better place and we're okay with it.
Okay.
At least I'm okay with it. I don't know if Ross is okay with it.
What if Ross says, no, Eddie, I'm not okay with it? What do we do then? We're live on the podcast now, guys. So,
I don't know.
Vote
I don't want to
now.
talk about it.
Okay.
We'll set up a live call-in next time.
Everybody can join in with the feedback.
I'm pretty happy with it. The thing is, I think with loadouts, I think we always look at like, what do we want to add? What do we want to change? Right. It's just that now we talk more about a specific vehicle that might bubble up. So yeah, I think we're pretty much there. I think again, like the things for me are more outside of the loadouts and like more like global systemic and balance issues. Those are the big things for me now.
As a group then, what are some of your favorite changes that we've made? And what was their impact for the community and gameplay? And it could be some of the changes we just listed, but maybe there's something else we did during the course of 2042. So, Eddie, let's start with you.
So I've got two changes that we've done, which actually one of them is a bit surprising to me that landed as well as it did, but I'm not going to complain. One of them, obviously, is our changes to the attack helicopter. As I said, I feel like it's a lot closer to how it used to be when you had a gunner and a pilot just flying around having fun. It's great. And the other one is actually an odd one, is our changes to Tor. I'm quite happy with how that landed. I mean, as you know, Tor was notorious for sitting in the back of the map just sniping everything, and we did reduce the potency of it in long range. But at the same time, with the update after that, we increased the kind of we kind of increased its power on close combat, right, by adding like grenade launcher, shotgun, and stuff. And I see people now using the Tor in a more aggressive role, and that is precisely what we wanted to achieve there. And I mean, when I play Tor, I also start to go into objectives and stuff, and it feels a lot more fun nowadays compared to how it used to be. You can still destroy a lot of things with it, but also kind of hold your own in close range. I'm pretty happy with that change out of nowhere. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Ross?
It's a really specific, small thing. It kind of sneaked out. It was the change that we did on the attack helis on the cameras, and I've been complaining about that incessantly for quite some time. And we sat down, and I remember when we looked at it, I was like, "Yep, that's like it's such a." It was such a small difference in terms of like the tweaking that we did, but it made, at least for me, it made the helicopters feel so much more controllable.
Yeah.
So that kind of sneaked out in season 6.
And I guess to follow up there, then there's maybe fun context for our listeners to have. First of all, Eddie mentioned earlier we've had a few feedback gathering sessions on both social channels such as Twitter /X, whatever we call it now, and Discord, where we asked the community like, hey, what do you feel about jets, helicopters? And we got a ton of feedback. I think, Eddie, you just mentioned over 1,200 comments for just one of those. I think it was for jets. So there's a lot of feedback to sort through. From players, but we enjoy reading it and capturing that. And then also for us as a team, there are so many changes that we already want to make on top of the feedback we also get from players. So when do we sometimes make those changes? I think there's only much stuff we can add into a single update. So Ross, when you mentioned, the vehicle or the heli handling changes sneaked into season 6, it's maybe something that's been on the radar for a while, but we also didn't find the right spot to where to put it, or we didn't have the time to get to it yet. So, how is that for you as a team to get all that feedback and knowing all the things we want to change, and when can we do it?
I think people don't realize just how much we actually go and check comments online. I think it's I'm on Reddit too much. So I think in general, like we get that kind of reactive feedback really quickly just through ourselves. We have weekly catch-ups to sync on all of this stuff, just to get like the general pulse. And then obviously we have like the longer term feedback that will come in where we kind of curate questions. We want to find out certain things. Yep. So there's a lot of feedback that comes in. And then obviously some of those things can be like, we're like one of the big things, right, is you see feedback before a patch is actually launched, which is really good because you get to understand like, okay, like what are the community getting nervous about? Yep. Like, what are they thinking? But then you actually have to get to the point where it's out there. You can see some data. You can get like a handle on exactly like where are the issues coming from. And then obviously you've got to then implement it. And then you've got to get it out and explain to players like, this is what we've done. This is why we've done it. And then see how that settles. So for some things, there can be a really big process. Others are smaller. There'll be things that will just pop up from the team. And then obviously when you're trying to release a big patch like a season, some things just naturally overshadow what still could be really good small changes. So like, we had aim assist was a big one, right? And then redacted and that threw up feedback on weapons.
Yep.
And other things. So yeah, sometimes it's you work on something and then you're like, hey, did anybody see that? And then you'll see, one guy on Reddit who'll be like, yeah, I saw this thing. And then you're like, okay, my life has meaning.
That's an awesome moment when it connects with, the player's experience, the specific change you enjoyed and we made. And to add there as well, I think you mentioned we list ahead of each update/patch what changes we are making. So right now, we always aim to have the patch notes out on the Friday before the update goes live, which is usually on a Tuesday. So we have some time already, like over the weekend and the Monday and the Friday to gather some initial feedback about upcoming changes that we're making. And then we see them into the hands of players when the update goes live. Does it play differently than they expect? But it helps us, be aware and stay vigilant in knowing which further changes need to take place. So I think, hopefully that's interesting context for all of you listeners. Then let's look at the upcoming update itself. Update 6.2, which will launch early December. We're currently hard at work writing the patch notes for that, but I think we can already give a few updates that we're making. Eddie, do you want to take it away?
I think 6.2 is going to make our pilot a little bit happy.
Okay.
I mean, we've had complaints about our, aiming system on air vehicles for the longest time.
Sorry, can you clarify what the feedback there was from players?
So the feedback, if you want it really detailed, is that on BF 2042, we don't cheat when you shoot. We don't shoot from center of the screen, right? You shoot from left and right if you have two weapons on either side. And that obviously makes it tricky and difficult for most part to shoot because, it is difficult. That is why I don't want to go too much into tech stuff, but it's different when you always shoot from center of your screen. It's always centered. It's always accurate.
Yep.
But when you have it, you know the story. And to actually try to help the situation, we are adding a computed impact point for our air vehicles, which is going to take into consideration a lot of different English. I don't know. Give me a second. Factors, right. We are adding a computed impact points for our air vehicles, which is going to take into consideration a lot of different factors such as drag, gravity, velocity, angular velocity, and all this kind of cool stuff, and actually draw an impact point for you. So it's going to be accurate when you fire your weapons. Mm-hmm. And this is, I hope people are going to be happy with that once it gets launched. And also, while we were at it, we are adding a rotational HUD icon for the gunner and pilots so they can actually communicate through HUD without using, microphones or whatever to tell them where they're looking at. This is something that we have had on previous games on BF4. I don't remember if we had it on BF3, but anyway, this is going to help for both players to see the heading and positioning of both gunner and the pilots. And I hope they like that as well.
Awesome.
There are some changes, but those are minor. I'm pretty sure you're gonna sort it out in the patch notes.
Yep. So keep an eye out for the patch notes, who should be ready for all of you early December as well. In every update, we just have some minor balance changes to two vehicles here or there. So keep an eye out for the patch notes when they release, and there will be more in there. This is the big moment. We've had some questions from the community as well, or just hot topics that we've been reading on social channels about feedback around vehicles. So I thought today we go over some of those questions and answer what we can. Does that sound fun, Eddie and Ross?
Hell yeah!
Hell yeah! Let's go.
I don't know.
So I guess this is Eddie like, oh no, I'm going to be put on the spot. So this is a little mini Q&A from feedback we've seen. So let's just jump straight in. And Ross, Eddie, either of you, feel free to jump in with your answers. I'm not going to throw it to either of you. Just, feel free to go at it. So first one, why do we have weapons coming from Portal but not vehicles? What can we answer there?
Yeah, so I think Portal weapons are definitely easier to bring over into all-out warfare. There's less differences, although we did have to make some changes into handling. So it's a bigger deal to bring a vehicle over. Saying that, we've talked about this a lot. Like, what would we bring over? I think it needs to have a role within the all-out warfare roster. Mm-hmm. So there's certain vehicles like the Warthog that I think could really shine. So we're not against it. It's just a case of like where it fits within all of the other stuff to do.
Okay.
And there's more work than you'd imagine for Eddie and the team to bring them over and then do the updates that are needed.
It's not a straightforward copy paste.
No,
okay.
I wish it was.
Okay. And I guess so. To summarize, not a copy paste. A lot of work goes into making sure they fit, in the current gameplay of 2042 / All Out Warfare, but also they need to have a very specific role within the already existing roster. It's not beneficial to the gameplay to just bring over a vehicle that technically already exists, just with in another look / form. Is that correct?
Yeah,
okay.
and yeah, that's accurate. And again, when if you look at the roster of the vehicles that we've introduced, I think they've all had a fairly specific and unique role. And the thing about vehicles, right, is that it really changes, or it has the potential to change the meta more drastically than when you just introduce a weapon. So it's a case of, hey, maybe we could bring over some Portal vehicles, but there has to be a really good reason for it. But yeah, it's something we talk about all the time, and I think we have in our mind like what vehicles that we would want to bring over. It's just when we get to it.
Okay, next question then. We've seen comments that jets aren't as competitive for ground combat as in previous Battlefield titles. Eddie, can you answer that one?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's not wrong. That is correct, but that is the primary goal of jets on Battlefield 2042. I feel like there is a certain level of expectation set by previous games that the jets need to be like kind of, jack of all trades, destroying everything, both in air and ground. But jets on Battlefield 2042 have a different role. The main goal is to take care of air targets. And once that is done, you basically help your teammate on the ground. You're not as potent, but that is by design. And I think we are okay with that.
Okay, so as a summary, we don't want him to single-handedly dominate the entire gameplay. Air-focused, support wolf towards ground targets.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you. Next question then. So how do you feel about the current state of the Nightbird, and are we making any further changes to it? Ross?
So it's pretty close. It's maybe overperforming a little bit. Personally, I think we can probably do some handling updates at some point in the future, but nothing outside of that.
Okay, so no immediate plans for further adjustments, and we're quite happy with it currently.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Next question then. Are we planning any changes for the stealth helicopters? Eddie, I'll throw that one to you.
No immediate plan on the stealth helicopter. We know it's not as competitive against the other two helicopters like Little Bit and attack helicopter, but the role of it's more towards more casual play, and you have that passive style of gameplay that you cannot get locked on, and we are kind of happy with it not being as strong as the other two. I think it's in a spot that doesn't necessarily require a change today.
Okay, so knowing where they were in Season 1, they were extremely powerful, but how we currently see their gameplay is, you cannot get locked on, so you have more safety while operating them, but in return that means they are not as strong as the other helicopters who are, more vulnerable in their gameplay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
You have less firepower, but obviously more safety, more defensive powers.
So there's a trade-off there. Great. Then next question. We haven't recently reviewed Liz and her gameplay. and how she might be too strong and negatively impact the many more vehicles we've added since Season 1. So are any changes planned for Liz and her impact on the vehicle gameplay? Either Ross or... Yeah, I guess I'm going to throw this one to you, Ross.
Yes. So I think she's a little too air focused. So I think the next changes that you'll see to Liz will be that we'll tend her more towards ground targets and pull her a little bit further from air stuff.
Okay. Like right now she's powerful against all vehicles, but we want to make her more targeted to specific vehicles within the gameplay, so she doesn't dominate by herself in taking down vehicles. Is that a correct summary? Yeah,
basically, and to maybe open up a bit more of a window for the other engineers.
Okay. And then the last question, what is our current focus for any future changes to vehicles? Ross, I'll throw that one to you.
So can't cover specifics. So there's no like timeline that's set in stone at the moment, but there's a few things that we talk about a lot. Mm-hmm. So there's like some more specific things like thermals for tanks, removing delays on turret aiming for tanks as well. But then there's broader things that we talk about. So systemic damage. I think in general, just the balance of defensive mechanics on aircraft versus soldiers. And I think just vehicles versus soldiers and the balance of those interactions, like going both ways, to be fair, like vehicles on soldiers, defensive systems, and then just like how effective soldiers can be at eliminating particularly ground targets. So there's a few things that we poke at and we talk about, but can't commit to anything just yet.
Okay, so there's a lot of things that we want to do with some of the specifics that are top of our mind, but to confirm, nothing set in stone right now. So no announcement on like, hey, this is next. But at least we wanted to give you a heads up where what our current thinking is as a team. Then that ends it for the little Q&A section we had. So hopefully this was helpful based on some of the feedback we've been reading across our social channels. Normally, we eat a cookie now on the podcast, but I'm alone in the room here, and Ross and Eddie are remoting into the recording. So we're going to skip the cookie. So then that's actually the end of the podcast. So that's all we had for today. Eddie and Ross, thank you so much for being here with me. Eddie, this was your first time on the podcast, so how was it?
Yeah, that was fun. Except for some of the questions.
Sorry. Hey,
hard questions.
I'm not here to make your lives any easier, but hopefully the community appreciates us taking the time to sit down and answer some of the questions and, talk about where our mind is at for a lot of the changes we've done to vehicles, etc.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to give you a final moment as well to share any thoughts you have that maybe we didn't cover. So if there's anything else you want to add or maybe give a shout out to the community, feel free to do so now.
I just wanted to actually give a shout out to the community. They're always vocal and it's part of the drive. And we have done a lot of changes to our vehicles based on community feedback, and I hope that shows. Shout out to them. Stay vocal and let us know how you feel about all the changes that we do.
Awesome. Thank you. Anything from you, Ross?
Yeah, I think just to echo that, like for me, a live service lives and dies on how engaged the community is, and like we're here to fix problems. We can't fix all the problems, but we're going to try our best. And so some of those problems are going to come from our team and like where we want to take things, but like a vast majority of them are going to come from the community. So keep telling us like what you want, what annoys you, what things are broken. You'd be surprised at how often we reflect on that feedback and how much we talk about it and actively seek it out. And just keep it coming.
Yeah, so from my end as well, then shout out to the community. I think your feedback is incredibly important to us as a team. We read through it a lot on our social channels. We discuss it as a team. We have a weekly call actually with the community team, and For example, our core gameplay team, Ross, Eddie is on there, where we talk about vehicles and what we're seeing and what we can improve next. So please keep that feedback coming. We really appreciate it. Then further, of course, we will be back with more podcast episodes. But in the meantime, get in touch with us at #InsideBattlefield on our social channels or at podcast@battlefield.com. And then lastly, from all of us here at our Battlefield studios, stay classy and PTFO. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
See you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.